Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the interruption. Just wanted to inform you that we'll be just waiting a few more minutes for everyone to roll in, but feel free to have any beverages in the back or snacks in the meantime. Thank you so much for your patience and for being here today. Thank you. All right, let's get started. Good evening, distinguished participants and esteemed speakers. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to neuralberta.tech speaker event. Oh, apologies here. There we go. Speaker event, let's get started from the top. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to neuralberta.tech's speaker event, natChat Startups and Neurotech. Today we have the opportunity to delve into a fascinating world where business and technology intersect with the intricate workings of the human brain. This event promises to be a captivating exploration of innovation, breakthroughs, and the limitless potential that neurotechnology holds for the future. Neurotech startups are at the forefront of transforming how we understand and assess mental health and diagnose and treat neurological disorders. Throughout our time together, we will have the privilege of hearing from visionary entrepreneurs, brilliant researchers, and industry leaders who are driving the neurotech revolution forward. Joining us today are our esteemed guest speakers, Dr. Perry Kinkade, Simba Nyazika, Dr. McKinney, and Holly Burland from the Alzheimer's Society of Alberta and Northwest Territories. Their shared insights, experiences, and success stories will provide us with invaluable perspectives on the challenges and opportunities with this rapidly evolving field. This event serves as a platform for learning and networking, bringing together a diverse community of professionals and enthusiasts passionate about neurotechnology. By fostering connections and sparking meaningful conversations, we hope to encourage interdisciplinary collaborations and ultimately accelerate the progress of neurotech ventures. So, let us embark on this remarkable journey together. We encourage you all to engage, connect, and embrace the remarkable ideas that emerge from today's discussion. Let's get started. So, a little background about our organization. What is neuralberta.tech? We are Alberta's leading neurotechnology innovator network supporting student innovation, interdisciplinary collaboration, and education in the BCI or brain-computer interface space. Today, you can look forward to exclusive talks from industry professionals, academics, to expand your network through networking, and a chance to win neuralberta.tech merch as well as Starbucks gift cards. So, just taking a brief look at today's event schedule outlined above. Very shortly, Vice President of External Relations and Chief Development Officer Holly Burland will develop a sponsor address on behalf of the Alzheimer's Society of Alberta and Northwest Territories. Afterward, we'll continue with presentations from Simba Nyazika, Dr. McKinney, and finally our keynote speaker, Dr. Perry Kinkade. This will be followed by respective Q&A sessions where you'll be able to ask questions, and a brief intermission where we'll serve food and beverages officially and networking. All right, starting off. First off, I would like to introduce Holly Burland. Holly serves as the Vice President of External Relations and Chief Development Officer at the Alzheimer's Society of Alberta and Northwest Territories. With over 25 years in the charitable sector, she brings a wealth of experience in fundraising and external relations. She has worked in several healthcare and research-focused organizations, including the Stollery Children's Hospital Foundation, the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry at the University of Alberta, and the Royal Alexandra Hospital Foundation. Holly is a certified fundraising executive and holds a master's degree in leadership studies from Royal Roads University. In her current role, she uses her expertise to build strong relationships and support advocacy and research for people living with dementia. Please welcome Holly Burland.
Well, thanks everyone. Can you hear me? It sounds a little different up here. Thanks so much for having us. We're really thrilled. The Alzheimer's Society of Alberta and Northwest Territories is thrilled to be the sponsor of tonight's event. And I know everybody is spending their Saturday evening indoors. If you're here in Alberta, in Edmonton, you know how sunny it is. I'm not sure where everybody else is from online, but thanks so much for the opportunity to chat with you tonight and to be here. It's really very exciting. I thought maybe what I could do is talk a little bit about our organization and talk about how we provide what we call help for today and hope for tomorrow for individuals who are affected by Alzheimer and other types of dementia. And I also want to talk about a research program that we recently launched, and potentially just a bit about the charitable sector and interacting with various health charities or individuals like me. And I'm really pleased to be here because I get to learn from you, and it's super exciting. So essentially, most people would be aware of Alzheimer's disease or dementia. It's a group of progressive neurological disorders that cause changes to the brain. And of course, that leads to cognitive impairments and the inability to, essentially live life independently. Often we see memory loss, the loss of the ability to swallow or to eat properly, walking, and a complete loss of independence. Eventually, the complications are so significant, ultimately leading to death. And of course, there's no known cause or cure for Alzheimer's disease or other dementias, which makes it difficult. And on average, we see people, we call it their journey. On average, that's about 8 years. Of course, that varies from person to person. So we're with people for quite some time. The numbers are startling, and they're growing. So globally, it's about 1% of the population. And in Canada, as of 2020, the number was just shy of 600,000 individuals with a diagnosis. That trajectory is pretty significant, and in less than 10 years, by 2030, it will almost double to 1 million, and by 2050, that will almost triple. So 2030 is not really that far away. And the economic burden of that is fairly significant at the moment. That's anticipated to be about $872 billion. And of course, people in their lives who are around them helping to provide care, that might be friends, a family member. As of 2018, care partners were on average spending 26 hours per week helping to provide free care. And that's the equivalent of 235,000 full-time unpaid jobs, and valued at $7.3 billion annually. And we know as the rates increase that number will grow. In Alberta, it's very similar. Our national organization, Alzheimer's Society of Canada, recently, just last September, published a report called the Landmark Study, and they looked at the trajectory, the anticipated rates over the next number of years in Alberta. It's one of the highest. It's anticipated to go up by almost triple, 286%, over the next 20 years. So there is a market, and there's a significant need for our organization. So our organization, what is it that we do? So if people are on average spending 8 years on this journey with their families and loved ones, they need fairly significant support as they go through this journey. And so we provide support groups. Navigational support is a big one. You can imagine people need support going into long-term care. They need to do long-term financial planning. They need emotional and healthcare support. So we have navigators that throughout the province that help to do that. So we have 7 different offices right across the province and 1 in Yellowknife. And, last year we serviced 7,800 unique individuals. And we know that at the moment there are approximately 60,000 individuals with a diagnosis. There's lots of people who have dementia who are not diagnosed. And so you can see that there's a pretty significant gap. Even though we know that we're doing good work, there could be an Alzheimer's Society on every street corner almost to meet that demand. So we provide a lot of information, workshops, webinars, experts. But I have to say one of the highlights for me is around our Hope for Tomorrow program. So even though there's not a known cure or a cause, what is really significant to me in my role is the research program that we're able to support. So Hope for Tomorrow is a $5 million investment over the next 5 years for Alberta-based researchers. So we are just coming to the close of the first cycle. I had the pleasure of being at a business meeting this morning where we made the decision about which projects we were going to fund. So that was really exciting, and stay tuned for those details in September around World Alzheimer's Day. But what's really interesting is that we were able to send out a survey before we launched the program. We wanted to know what was important to our stakeholders. So we were hearing from researchers, we were hearing from government, we work with allied, healthcare professionals, pretty much all the time have a really good idea of what they see as priorities for research. But we asked our clients, we asked our care partners, we asked staff, we asked regular folks who just work with dementia patients in the hospitals. And it was very interesting that they too, there was pretty much synergy right across the board from all of those groups about what they felt were priorities for research. And that was innovation and diagnosis and prevention. It was maintaining quality and maintaining quality of life. So this year we have put our competition towards funding projects that improve quality of life. And that will change over the cycle of the 5 years, depending on what the feedback is. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what Hope for Tomorrow might mean. So I don't know if you would be aware, but Alzheimer's and dementia research doesn't receive very much money per capita. In fact, it's one of the lowest. So statistics available from 2018 indicate that Alzheimer's and dementia research receives $5 per capita, and this is in comparison to heart disease and stroke research, which receives $12 per capita. Multiple sclerosis research, it's $194, and ALS research is $700 per capita. So we really want to change that, and we have stakeholders that also want to change that and feel renewed and hopeful with the prospect of cutting-edge research and like the idea of funding at home. So the Alberta-based piece is really important to our folks. We also support a national research project, or research program through Alzheimer's Society Canada. So we are very present on the research scene. But what I'm thinking of is, how important are you guys who really represent hope for tomorrow and what may be the future for people? And I'm wondering if you've thought about networking with people like me, and what would that mean for your program, projects, initiatives, and curiosity. We don't have a program necessarily that is related to entrepreneurship, but we want to be more assertive, we want to be more innovative, and we want to be more present. We want to know what it is that we need to do to move the needle forward. And so we're open to feedback and dialogue and consultation. We're actively looking for partnerships. It's one of our key KPIs. And what we do have is that we have people with lived experience. We have connections with stakeholders. We talk with allied healthcare professionals all the time. We're connected with government. And I'm assuming that pretty much everyone here is connected in various ways, but partnerships really are the key. We haven't been able to do much in quite a number of years, although people are working hard and they've made some strides. But we really want to offer people hope for tomorrow, and I feel like you are the conduit for that. So maybe to think about that, I don't know where everybody is in terms of their career or their project status, but to think about connecting with people in a different way, and to stay curious and motivated. This is an area that's going to grow pretty significantly, and so what are we going to do to meet those challenges in the very near future? We saw with COVID how the system is close to breaking, or for some people it was broken, and so people are really motivated to do something new and different. So I encourage you to do that. And if you like, take my card, or you can, get in touch with me at the society here. I'm here in our administrative office in Edmonton, and so welcome your feedback. We might not have all the answers all at once, but collaboration and working in partnership is something that we really want to do. And so I leave it at that. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Holly, for your wonderful sponsor address and comprehensive overview. Not only was it insightful, but it was also very inspiring, especially reaching out to our generation and discussing the far-reaching impact and implications on neurological disorders. Not only does it affect our society wholly, but also our personal lives, especially with the increasingly growing aging population nowadays. So thank you for that. Should the audience have any questions or would like to learn more about the Alzheimer's Society of Alberta and Northwest Territories, I highly encourage you to connect with Holly during the networking period. Up next, I would like to introduce our first guest speaker as well, Simba Nyazika. Simba is a psychology and neuroscience graduate from the University of Alberta and firmly believes in the importance of good mental health as a fundamental human right. With over 7 years of clinical experience as a behavior consultant, he has supported individuals of all ages struggling with diverse mental health challenges. Simba's passion for mental health has led to the creation of groundbreaking initiatives, including the world's first mobile virtual reality-based brain training program, Cognilit, and the successful development of Rehab VR, a cognitive rehabilitation program to support stroke recovery in partnership with the Glenrose Rehabilitation Hospital. As a co-founder of the Nyazika Research Group, Simba and his team are dedicated to creating a neurocognitive platform that has the potential to revolutionize mental health on a global scale. Please welcome Simba Nyazika.
How do I do that? Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. Can everybody hear me? Hi everyone, my name is Simba. I am the CEO and co-founder of Nyazika Research Group. Funny enough, Holly, when I was listening to you, the reason why I started Nyazika Research Group was because my grandmother had dementia. And being originally from Zimbabwe, we didn't have any tools or strategies to be able to support her. And there were no services to be able to support her at the end of her life. So when we went back to visit her, she didn't even recognize us. So the idea behind Nyazika Research was to be able to create a system that can not only proactively prevent dementia, but also help people be able to manage mental health ailments. So this is kind of a quick overview of what we'll be talking about, who we are, what biometrics is, the types of biometrics that we use in the context of our company, and then some of the challenges that we have faced working with some of the projects that we have worked with. And then I'll share some case studies because we've done a lot of cool and stressful work. Why Nyazika exists is that it is anticipated that 50% of the population by the age of 40 will have some form of a mental illness. If you are lucky enough to be one of the people that won't have it, you'll almost certainly know someone who is. And the specific problem that we have decided to tackle is the idea that when you go to see a mental health therapist, and then your session is 2 weeks later, there's a lot of information between there that can be used to inform treatment. That information could be the quality of your sleep, your stress levels, your blood pressure, your level of activities. And so what we are trying to build and what we have built is a system that allows clinicians to gain insights into what's going on. And what is unique about our system is that we leverage third-party devices like Apple Watch or Fitbit, because those tools allow us to gain insights into how people are doing outside the clinical setting as well as outside the research lab. And so when we talk about biometrics, typically originated was around the physical and behavioral characteristics which were used to identify a person. But this idea has expanded beyond that because we don't use biometrics just to unlock your iPhone or to be able to do eye tracking. It now goes beyond that, being able to use and assess and measure things like your heart rate variability through your Apple device. And so the idea of biometrics has expanded quite a bit from its original concept. And so part of the important thing that we realized is when I was a behavior consultant working with kids with autism, a lot of our analysis, a lot of our diagnosis required a lot of behavioral, like watching behavior. But the organ that we're actually analyzing is the brain. And so we're using tertiary characteristics to determine what is going on and use that as a way to inform the treatment. That works really well. But the question we asked ourselves is, what if we can start directly measuring our mental performance? What if we start measuring our mental capabilities through some of these technologies that are coming out? And so from our perspective, if we're able to leverage some of these devices that are now available to the consumer, outside the research lab, outside the clinic, there's a lot more data that we're able to get so we can do more objective assessments. We can enhance the precision of treatment because if a clinician is monitoring your vitals between sessions, they can tell that maybe Mondays are super stressful because maybe your coworker stresses you out. And so you might need to focus on strategies to help you manage your stress on Monday. Or maybe you've got the in-laws coming up. So your blood pressure might not require medication, but maybe tools to be able to manage your in-laws. So the ability to be able to gain these insights can better inform the treatment that is being provided to individuals suffering from mental wellness. And then thirdly, around early detection and diagnosis. We have developed a lot of VR-based cognitive training programs that we have tested with athletes as well as made available to the public. The idea behind it is, at this point, there's no way to quantify your level of focus. Sometimes we know that our memory might not be good or it's hard to pay attention to something, but how do we quantify this? So the intention of the program was that people can do their own brain training at home, and if they're feeling that their focus is wavering, they have a value that they can assign to that I was doing level 50, now I can't even get to level 40. So using it as a benchmark to get a sense of how their mental performance is can also help in the future. Of course, more research is needed to support that early diagnosis and detection of different mental health conditions. And so the type of biometric devices we have used is EEG, where we have worked with a company that has got a wearable home-based EEG device to do attention tracking. This company called Allegory does research in students where it does focus training, being able to help students with ADHD assess their level of focus and use other biometric factors to see if there are any ways and tools that they can utilize to help improve the students' performance. We also do wearable devices such as the Health Gauge device or Apple Watch to help with those physiological factors that can influence mental wellness. Yes, assessing the brain is important, but if you're not sleeping, that will also impact your cognitive function. And when I was working with a lot of kids that had quote-unquote challenging behaviors, one of the first things that I'll do is, are they sleeping well? Because no matter what strategy or tool we utilize to help these kids, if they're not sleeping well, their brain did not have the capacity to do that. And sometimes parents were so stressed out, they were not even able to monitor their kids' sleep. So by leveraging wearable devices, then that's a way for us to be able to monitor that and use that to see how the sleep is improving over time. And finally, eye tracking, particularly in the context of VR. A lot of the VR devices now have eye tracking embedded inside. So within our own training program, there are ways that you could cheat the system by moving your eyes when you're doing the training. With eye tracking, we're able to tell that people were using compensatory strategies to improve their performance, as opposed to actually showing that there was improvement in their cognitive function. This was a concept that we were planning on moving forward with our Glenrose project, which we did build the prototype, but funding and COVID put a dent in that. And so when we look at biometrics in action, and this is like a lot of different devices are coming, we notice that a lot of different research is being done to use biometrics for diagnosis. Like, for example, using your voice to diagnose Parkinson's or depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia. And I believe with schizophrenia, the research is actually being done by one of the doctors here at the U of A. Using gait for dementia or chorea, as well as the face for acromegaly. Sorry, my second language is kicking in. But what we can see here is that the use of biometrics in being utilized for diagnosis is becoming more commonplace. And although there's a lot of great ways to diagnose and assess, biometrics can offer us a more cost-effective way and maybe more efficient way to be able to diagnose a lot of different mental health conditions. And so in our case, we've used biometrics in a lot of different ways. The first project that we worked on was on using virtual reality training with eye tracking in professional athletes. And so what athletes are always looking to do is become the best. So they're looking to perform the best, outcompete the competition, and they know that mental performance is very important. But they don't have a lot of tools to utilize in terms of improving their mental skills. So they utilized our system to not only train their performance, but create a benchmark of their general mental performance so that if they got a concussion, which we hoped they didn't, but when they got a concussion, they had a benchmark to actually take that information and be like, my score was 70 prior to the concussion, it has gone down to 30. And although it was not a fully validated measure, they used that as part of their way to map out the progression as the athlete was recovering from that concussion. And this is one of the athletes we worked with, Sean Brown, from the Philadelphia Stars. He got us to learn a lot about football. The other thing that we utilized is we used a VR-based system for stroke cognitive rehabilitation. If you know anything about stroke, a lot of the rehabilitation that takes place has to do with motor rehabilitation or speech rehabilitation. But very few tools are available to actually support cognitive rehabilitation. So we worked with the Glen Rose to build a prototype in which we created a VR-based escape room for patients to be able to engage in different tasks, which were fun, but also assess how well they were able to navigate those different tasks. And so within that project, we were able to know that there was a potential avenue there, but if you've ever had a concussion, or if you've ever been hungover, looking at a screen can be very uncomfortable. So part of the reason why this project did not move forward was that after a brain injury, it was very difficult for them to look at a screen. And so the idea behind VR, even though it seemed promising, AR would have been much more conducive for this population. However, there's a lot of other projects that are still being done around our stroke rehabilitation. And then finally, last year, because what our system is that it's a data integration system that allows you to track different biometrics. And so we partnered up with a clinical trial company that was looking at running a specific psilocybin compound for patients with drug-resistant depression. What they were looking at doing was getting their patients to run a 30-day program, and between those sessions when they got their treatment, be able to monitor the biometrics. And that information was not necessarily being used within the clinical study, but they wanted to see, could they get additional data to support what the patients were going through that could inform the quality of not only the treatment they were getting, but also the new therapy modality that they were creating. And so in this case, the use of biometrics gave them additional data insights into how other lifestyle factors can impact and influence the quality of the treatment that they were creating. And so from our perspective, that's why we are super excited for biometrics. And we are also aware that as a commercial product, they may not be as accurate as what you use in a lab, but in about 5 years, we truly believe that the information and the technology is actually going to get there. But there are some challenges. So one of the things that we realize is that with a lot of these third-party devices, there are issues with accuracy. There's issues with reliability. Because like a lot of wearable devices, if you are moving or running, the quality of the sensors and the data that's being collected is greatly reduced. The other thing is we can't control whether the person is wearing their watch the same way. So one day we might get really good data, the other days not so good data. The other thing that comes with a lot of this is user acceptance and privacy. Who owns the data? And so when we start merging and integrating all these systems onto one platform, we now have to not only agree with what Apple's privacy policy is, there's our privacy policy, there's Microsoft Azure's privacy policy, there's Allegory Systems' privacy policy. And we're trying to create a whole ecosystem in which people's data, they still own it and they have access to it, but it becomes really complicated. And a lot of us might not yet be comfortable sharing our data with maybe a third party or a company, because sometimes you don't want people to know why your heart rate is elevated, because you could be working out or, as we're joking around, doing other stuff. And then the other stuff is just the interpretation of data, especially if it's multimodal data, taking activity data and EEG data and taking HRV data and trying to combine all that data. It becomes really complex, it becomes really messy, and because it's coming from different devices, it is a fun problem to have. And then the other two components is just around standardization as well as integration, because when we work with other devices, like when we work with AHS, they have their own system. They have their own EMR system. So they don't want to utilize our platform and our dashboard. They are like, whatever data you have has to fit within our own EMR. And if you go to BC, it's a different system. If you go to Saskatchewan, it's a different system. In the States, it's a different system. So as much as we see a lot of potential in how this data can be used to support not only neuroscience research in the field, but mental health, there's still a lot of complexity around being able to collate all that data, use it in a way that's meaningful, control a lot of the privacy components, and ensure that the data is actually meaningful when it's being used for the specific individual. That's everything I have. Thank you. Questions? Yes?
What's AI going to do to your organization and your field of research and enterprise?
It's going to make our job easier. So one of the things that we have not done is we have not added any AI into our platform yet because we don't have enough data. So what we envision in the future is, because we are collecting a lot of this data from different devices, that data can be used to create predictive algorithms for specific populations. So if, let's say, it's going to be around employee burnout, as an example, or if for our athletes being able to tell, okay, are they at risk for an injury, or hopefully with dementia and Alzheimer's, because that's what's near and dear to my heart, are there other potential data points that we can take from different data sources to be able to have a maybe more sensitive measure that can be used by the public, and it's automated so that the public can be flagged. But of course, some of the challenges is, do people want to be flagged that they might be at risk for this? So those are things that we will need to figure out. So it's going to make it easier because we've got a lot of data that we are collecting, but all the other challenges that we have, we'll kind of need to also address those in addition to what the AI model will be doing. Yes?
Are there any outcomes you can talk about regarding the cloud for athletes? What was the outcome of that case study?
So, yeah, so for the athletes, the biggest outcome we got is we worked with one of the hockey training facilities called Quantum Speed here in Edmonton, and the athletes went through a full training program with our system. And the major outcome that we got is our system, after the week of testing, was able to predict which ones were the high-performing athletes. And what I mean by that is the coaches already knew who the most likely to be drafted into the NHL athletes were. Those were the ones that performed the best within the data that we got. And so in a sense, even though we didn't tell them anything new, we're able to allow them to quantify what those measures were from the different data sources so that they can look for those patterns in other athletes. And then the other question that ended up coming up is, could they train other athletes that didn't have the highest probability to go into the NHL on those skills so that they've got a larger chance of being able to do that? So that's an example of one of the outcomes. And then another psychologist, of course, for the concussion management. So they did use it informally as a way to benchmark the impact of a concussion, and then did the training every week to see how they were progressing based on what their pre-concussion performance was.
Any other questions for Simba?
So I'm interested to know how you're using EEG data to track mental health as you talked about.
Say that again?
How you're using EEG data
Yeah.
to track mental health, and how reliable it can be for tracking mental health, EEG data.
Yeah, so the EEG data that we use is through another company. That what they do is they are focusing right now on, it's like just for the prefrontal, where they do focus training. And the way they're doing the research is they've got specific cut points, I can't remember the technical term, where they can look at where the person was in the focus zone. And so they allow us to be able to download that raw data and choose what cut point we want based on how sensitive we want the EEG information to be, but specifically, again, in the context of for students in this case. So the way they use it is that they'll run these focus groups in which students will come into a classroom, and the first 10 minutes, you basically do focus training, which provides you with neurofeedback in terms of if you're in the focus zone, you can tell that you're in the focus zone. If you're out of the focus zone, you can tell that you're out of the focus zone. And then providing them with tools to help them be able to stay in the focus zone. And some kids, they might get upset over it, right? So if you're not in the focus zone and you're getting frustrated, what tools can you use to get you back into there? And what they've noticed is that that translates to schoolwork. When you're trying to focus on an academic activity, and let's say the child is getting frustrated, what sort of tools can you also use to help them get to that point? So it's been more of their data that we are using to integrate into our system, not necessarily directly our data.
So the data is read by an expert, like an expert, or you are using some kind of AI model towards it?
No, right now all of our data requires an expert to look at it. Yeah.
So I think AI will help in that aspect.
Eventually, yeah. We joke around saying we don't use artificial intelligence, we believe in human intelligence. So eventually, once we have enough information from our human counterparts, because some data has to be contextualized. But we want to make sure that the clinician is contextualizing, because there could be other factors that our system is not picking up on. So if, let's say, a patient comes and they had, God forbid, like something happened, right? They are stressed out, their family event took place, then that cannot be picked up by any system because there's no way to pick what's happening in a person's life. So that information can be used to be like, okay, the person experienced this stressor, which can may be measured informally by HRV, but that contextual piece is so important before we can just leave it all to the AI model. That's what we believe anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious, what type of performance tests do you do with athletes? Is like pattern recognition or response times? Like what do those tests entail?
So our specific test is a multiple object tracking test in which athletes, let's say, for example, imagine you've got 8 balls in 3D space. 4 of those balls are highlighted, and then you have to track them. So the equivalent of that game, you know, when they've got the cups, and then you have to like remember where the ball is. Instead of tracking one thing, the athletes are tracking 4 out of the 8 objects in a 3D environment while we're doing eye tracking. And so what that does is that it imitates what an athlete will see if they are on the ice, where they have to track not only their opponents, but their players and the ball, and then be able to respond in that case. And so the idea behind that training is that we can get those objects to move much faster than what the athlete will experience on the field. And so if they're able to track it at 3 times the speed, then when they go back into the game, it's much easier for their brain to be able to do that. And with 3D multiple object tracking, there's already quite a bit of research saying it already improves like complex movement perception, visual processing speed, attention, and these different other components. But most of that has been done in a 2D environment, not necessarily in a virtual reality environment. So we kind of leveraged those studies, put the system in a virtual reality environment, and then we did a few of those tests. But the core of that research is based on the 2D model. Yeah. Yes?
Are you a pure research organization, or are you selling, are you commercial, small enterprise? What's your business model?
Yeah, so we are more of a commercial enterprise because the clinical trial was a project that we licensed our software for. The athletes that we've worked with, they paid for the program. So we are already selling aspects of our platform.
So you have clients?
Yes.
And they're paying clients?
They're paying clients, yes.
How do you find your clients? How do you market?
So the clinical trial, we met that company because they had a specific need for a software system to run the specific clinical trial that they were running. And so initially we thought that we were going to stay in the clinical trial space because we had like a client. But prior to that, when we were working with the athletes, we just called them. Hey, we've got this program. This is what it does. We've worked with these athletes. Are you interested in testing it out? So they'll test it out. Some of them will say, we need more hands-on because some of the coaches knew of the importance of it, but didn't want to manage that. And some of them will be like, yes, and then we ended up onboarding them.
What are the barriers to adoption of your technology?
So number one, status quo. So right now, the way things have been done, people don't really want to change. People are overwhelmed. So wanting to test out and try out and implement a new system can be a challenge for them. The other barrier to entry, especially for the clinical trials, is how much it costs, right? Everyone is kind of tight with their budget right now. So some people might not be ready or willing to pay for the project at this point. The privacy, the compliance kind of is a barrier, but we did 3 months of compliance training, and we had to spend 3 months and lots of painful time putting our system and our organization to that compliance. So that's not necessarily a barrier, but we have to keep and maintain to make sure that we're always compliant. And so those are kind of the main ones. So the budgetary constraints and then the willingness and the resources to actually go through the training to use our system.
Well, those are the questions? Yeah? Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Welcome again to Simba Nyazika. Thank you. A psychology graduate from the University of Alberta, Dr. McKinney completed his PhD at the University of Utah on brainwave technology and mental health assessment. He co-founded 8-Bit Cortex to adapt his research into gamifying corporate burnout risk assessments and improving workplace wellness for everyone. As the research director for BranchOut, Dr. McKinney promotes the impact of innovative brain health research and shares this insight with the community. When not thinking about the brain, Ty can be found exploring nature or connecting with Alberta's growing technology ecosystem. Please welcome Dr. McKinney.
roles that I've held over the years. I really think that being able to do a better job of sharing impact is one thing that we don't really teach academics and is really valuable and beneficial. So I'll use my own startup 8-bit cortex to illustrate a few key points for how to develop your own impact assessment story. And fundamentally what this comes down to is that when you're doing all your cool science and you're creating your startup, you want to be able to tell a story so that way it resonates with other people. Except the difference between a fiction story and a science story is that data and ideas are the characters, and that's where the tension comes from. And we're trying to use this to resolve a conflict, which is usually some sort of a social issue. It seems like mental health and dementia seems to be one of our unifying themes tonight. So we're trying to resolve those kinds of problems. And this is really difficult. My PhD was looking at psychometric research extensively, which I like to make the joke. It's like measuring things that according to some biologists technically don't exist, but are still measurable. So there's an art to being able to do this and a science, and I'm hoping to share a few of those ideas this evening. Because one of the challenges when it comes to assessing things like mental health is that there's lots of different ways that you can do it, and you could go crazy trying to figure out the individual ways and the best ways. So there's got to be a bit of a method to the madness, and let's see if we can try to arrive at some of those. And one of the things I think is really important to understand is that impact happens in the real world. So when you do academic research in laboratory settings, it tends to be in very controlled environments. And we really want to try to focus on how well can we describe what's going on. However, when it comes to making people's lives better, this happens outside of the lab. So as a result, this has a lot of impact for how we want to try to do our measurement approach. Specifically, we're going to be measuring things within complex, nonlinear dynamical systems. So this means that there's going to be lots of context dependency. When you do things, how you do things, all that kind of stuff can really make a lot more difference. So you want to try to find ways that can be a little bit more robust. And this is where you want to, wherever possible, try to focus on external validity as opposed to internal validity. Does everybody know about the difference between those two? Basically, external validity is all about how well things can generalize to a broader population. So if you do a study with a group of students, you're doing some beta testing with a handful of individuals, how well does that data, those outcomes, generalize to the rest of the world broadly construed? And that's really what you want to try to keep an eye on when you're trying to do impact assessment. So getting towards where I think neurotechnology really comes into it, basically every exciting tech company these days is a tech company of some sort because data is at the heart of whatever they're doing. And really you can think about this diagram here. It's all a matter of, are you collecting new data? Are you getting data that's being collected from some other data stream or source? And then what useful thing are you doing to that data to produce value and solve problems? And then really it's just a matter of plugging in different things for each of those variables and systems. And for my company in particular, we are developing gamified engagement surveys in order to make mental health psychoeducation more accessible and do a better job of collecting nuanced burnout risk. So one data stream that we were looking to be plugging into is benefits health claims data for predictive capacity, and we're going to be training machine learning models basically to forecast burnout risk because this can help insurance people be able to update their quotes. Turns out this is a really big problem that we didn't set out to solve. And the way that we make this useful is we dashboard it. So in this way, people are able to get reports or view a dashboard for some of these metrics. And the reason why this is really important is that mental health is really expensive for employers. It's estimated on average is about $15,000 per employee per year is the cost of burnout for organizations. And this is driven by aspects of productivity, leave from work, so if there's stress leave, the cost of rehiring people if there's turnover, as well as over the long-term higher insurance premiums itself. So basically, this is an expensive problem, and insurance providers are uniquely motivated to solve this over the course of the long term. They're willing to spend money now to save money later, which is somewhat unique with a lot of the stakeholders we spoke to. And one of the big opportunities that comes with this is that workplace wellness initiatives actually have a pretty good ROI. If you put something in place for about a year, the average ROI is going to be about 4x. So that's quite exciting. And one of the interesting nuances of this challenge is it's not that there is not resources available, it's that the resources tend to be underutilized. So really this is a question of how can we increase engagement and be able to do a better job of increasing resource utilization. So that's kind of my company in a nutshell, what we're doing, the problem we're trying to solve. How do we try to think about the impact that we're trying to produce? Well, you need some sort of a model, a theory of change, so to speak. So this is the theory of planned behavior. It's used quite extensively in social psychology and health psychology to try to model different kinds of behavior change. Basically, you have some sort of behavior, if this will work. There we go. Yeah, so you have some sort of behavior that you want people to do. Maybe this is recycling, maybe this is taking medication every day, maybe this is going to therapy. The only way that behavior is going to happen is if people have an intention to do that behavior. And then from there you can reverse engineer different social psychology factors about, is this something that people feel like they have the capacity to do? How do other people feel about it? How do they feel about it? And then you can model this statistically in order to get a probability that this behavior is going to happen. So you can use something like this in order to articulate the change that you would like to see through your research or your technology. And basically you can plug in different kinds of data into this model. And you can do this with different degrees of rigor. The important thing is that you're thinking about this and trying to do it with some degree of data. So you can take different kinds of behaviors. Maybe this is something that's passively collected as part of digital technology. Introspection, so using surveys, interviews, other kinds of more psychological research methods try to get people's explicit opinion of what's happening at different stages. Clinical outcomes, do people actually get better? That's a very valuable source of data. There's lots of data that can come from systems themselves. So think about like flows, like what's the wait time at hospitals, those sorts of things. And then finally, we live in a capitalist society, money matters. So anytime you can put a dollar sign to things, that's another data source that you can potentially use to demonstrate impact. So basically it's a matter of taking those kinds of variables and plugging them into a model like this. So this is what it looks like for our company, for just to illustrate this idea a bit more concretely. So as I mentioned, really what we're trying to do is get people to use their benefits when they otherwise might not use them. Get them to do more proactive wellness behaviors. And so we can measure that by resource utilization. This can come from the benefits provider as far as the claims data. In order to look at the intention, this is where we can start using introspective data in order to get a better job of what the culture around proactive wellness is within an organization. So that's how we can start to test that component of our theory. And then really the other aspects that we're interested in is what is the stigma for individuals? What is the perceived stigma from other people? Because these are major barriers to people actually using mental health resources in the workplace. And then finally, what's the ease of resource use? I was very shocked to find that there's not a lot of marketing or communication on how to access your benefits. So oftentimes as people genuinely don't know how to use the things that they're entitled to use. So there's a communication angle that can happen there. So these are the different kinds of data that we can be plugging into this model in order to measure our own impact. So that's enough about my company. Let's start thinking about your guys' stuff. So overall, when it comes to sharing impact, you kind of want to do a bit of a two-pronged approach as your research and your initiative develops. So initially, you're not going to have a lot of people going through it. It's going to be very individual focused. It's going to be very focused on story and that human connection. So you want to go very deep in trying to characterize the complete human experience of what's happening. So using stories and a lot of qualitative methods. Wherever possible, you want to try to understand like what are the emotions that are going into this impact, because ultimately that's what we know drives a lot of human behavior. So if you can understand that, you can start to understand a lot of other aspects of what the potential impact might be. Doing things like customer validation, like, I mean, are people willing to pay money for your solution, with people also being the government in the case of lots of healthcare solutions, as well as experiments around behaviors. So all of these are ways that you can use for like relatively small sample sizes in order to get some very rich data to start sharing the story of how your research or how your technology or your program is making a difference. Once more. Third time, there we go. So after you've done quite a bit of job working with the small groups and you got a deep understanding of the impact that you're trying to cause, then you want to start thinking like, okay, how can we scale this up, both in terms of the data you're collecting, but also in terms of the impact that it could potentially reproduce. So this is where you start transitioning from more of that qualitative stuff into more quantitative type approaches. So this is where, again, you want to think about things like generalizability. Does your technology work in all populations? And this can look at lots of different aspects of identity demographics. Is there gender discrepancies? Is race a relevant variable for your stuff? You want to make sure that to the extent possible the answer is no and this works for everyone, but you have to empirically test that. The scale of the impact, how many people are able to go through your program? How many people are able to access it? How much money are you able to save? Those sorts of things. And then when you're thinking about the savings that you could get, you can think about the direct savings. So like by using my procedure, we can cut down on certain number of hours of healthcare professionals or a certain number of disposable medical things like syringes or whatnot, different resources, materials that way. But also indirect savings. If you can delay the onset of dementia by 5 years, think about how much more impact and rich people's lives could be and how much less of a strain that could be on the healthcare system overall by having people still be able to be functional within their own homes and not institutionalized. So again, thinking about those indirect costs is really important and valuable as well. And this is where I think some science actually can go a long way for helping make sure that we do a good job of this, because there's a lot of bias that can happen within the measurement process. Again, this is literally what my PhD is all about. So there's an entire field called psychometrics about measuring these things that are difficult to measure. They're kind of like shadows. And there's notions of reliability and validity. Do your measurements generalize across people, conditions, time, those sorts of things? You want the answer to be yes. If the answer is no, it's probably not measuring what you think it is, which is the second component, validity. Does it measure what you think it measures? Intuitively, we want to say yes, but statistically, sometimes the answer is actually no. So you want to be careful of that to make sure that you can have faith in the data that you're collecting. Within research labs, oftentimes there's a focus on what's the gold standard, what's the best way that we could possibly do this. And in the real world, that gold standard is often not pragmatic or feasible. So you have to think, what is the good enough standard? How can you get data that you trust enough that you want to actually tell the story with it, but it's still pragmatic to be able to execute with the limited resources in a startup? And then wherever possible, you want your numbers to be actionable and understandable. If only economists can understand what this metric means, it's probably not the best metric. Or maybe it kind of depends on the audience. But wherever possible, you want these numbers to be something where if it goes down, it's obvious how you could change things around to make this number go back up again. So just some general rules of thumb for when you're trying to pick good numbers. These sorts of things do matter quite a bit. So, and then finally, I think this often doesn't get enough attention, is when we do academic studies, when we publish in a paper, that's not the end of sharing our impact. We have to go that next step and actually bring it into the community and engage with the relevant stakeholders. So, and there's an entire strategy around communications and marketing for how you can do a good job sharing these results. And if you're able to do that, you will get much better traction, much better engagement from your community. You'll be able to set up collaborations and partnerships much more effectively. So this is honestly something that could supercharge your venture or your research project. And on that note, I'm open for questions. And to clarify, the questions can be about impact assessment or my own startup. Yeah.
You know about behavioral change being an indication that the person may want to be or do something else.
Yes.
What if they don't want to do something?
Then they're probably.
In other words, it's disruptive to society. It's homelessness. It's where we want to bring about behavioral change in individuals who don't necessarily want to go.
No, so this is getting at the heart, really at the crux of the problem. Like, I mean, with those underused mental health resources, like, why would people not take advantage of free things that make their lives better? But there are certain things, for whatever reason, we have barriers to being able to implement that behavior change. And really have to think about that on a case-by-case basis for how to try to overcome those barriers. Sometimes it's a matter of implementing systems so those behaviors are just very easy to do. If something's passively measured, that's much more likely to happen than if you have to actively do some sort of measurement. And then the other component, and this is why psychologists really make the big bucks, is they are experts at convincing you to do things that you don't technically want to do but are good for you. So there's a very nuanced approach to that that really depends on the issue, but very good question overall. Yep.
I have a question. You talked about how making a good product and like just following a good plan accidentally in lab is only half the equation. The other half is you have to market towards the public. You can't use specific languages that only specialists know how to understand. Would you be able to give one example of how you implemented your products to be more applicable to the general public?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So honestly, because we're a startup and we're a business trying to make money, and we know that that's what impacts a lot of the decision making of various corporations, being able to speak in terms of money was actually critical for getting people to care about something like mental health, which before the pandemic was very taboo, didn't want to even really discuss it all that much. Since the pandemic, we're now doing a better job of actually being able to talk about these sorts of issues. And that's where things like being on podcasts, sharing your story, writing blog articles, just doing a very multimedia approach to sharing why this is important, some of the things that we can do. But then for our customers, it was going that next level of like, okay, but this is how it saves you money because fundamentally that's the value that they care about. A lot of times it really does come down to who's the person you're trying to communicate with or the organization and what do they care about and pitch the language in terms of what they care about, because then you get that buy-in. They often say like a good pitch has three components. First, you want to hit their heart, you want to make them care about it. Then you want to hit their head, make them think that you're brilliant and smart and have an elegant solution to the problem. And then you want to hit their wallet, because how is this going to make them money or save them money? And if you can do those three things, usually you can get people to at least get behind your idea. At least consider it. First one is absenteeism. So people, basically it's a sick day, but for mental health reasons. So when that happens, the company obviously is not getting the productivity from the day and they still have to pay you for a sick day kind of thing. So like you can calculate that. The next one is presenteeism, which is much more difficult to actually measure. And the way that I've seen it most commonly done is they take some multiple of your absenteeism, like 7 per se, and they're like, that's how much it takes when people show up to work, but they're not at peak capacity. So they're like kind of half doing things because that's where they're at. And that's actually thought to be one of the biggest cost drivers for that cost overall. Then there's short and long-term disability. Again, like HR and insurance companies track those sorts of things, so they can figure that out on a per company or average basis. And then there's rehiring costs. So this is where it depends quite a bit on the kind of company and the positions being filled. So that was on average across, but if it's technical positions or there's a lot of certifications for the position, then it tends to cost quite a bit more in order to get those people rehired. Whereas if it's more of like an entry-level job, then it might be a lower cost. But on average, it goes towards that. And then finally, as I mentioned, there's insurance costs. So people with mental health conditions, on average, tend not to be as good as managing their physical health conditions. So things like diabetes or dementia will actually be more costly for people with comorbid mental health conditions over the long run. So if you can do a good job of treating the mental health conditions, you can actually improve the cost of the physical health conditions down the road. So that's where the final insurance premiums piece comes in. So, and again, you can calculate those sorts of things. People much smarter than me have done that, and in Canada, it's about $15,000 per employee per year. I think in the United States, it's oddly a little bit lower, kind of depending on like what those individual components are. So yeah, very good question. Hopefully that answers in the detail you're hoping for. Any other questions? Yeah.
For those behavioral changes, and you want, I guess, people to be proactive, are there any factors that you found out that are more consistent across, like, I guess, a population, for people to be more proactive around here?
So I think one component that is often underestimated is the buy-in of leadership. It's like, I mean, if leaders within an organization think that this kind of behavior change should happen, then it's much more likely to happen. Whereas, like, I mean, if a program or something's being implemented, but the leaders like kind of don't really have the buy-in, they don't care that much, then it's much less likely to percolate through the organization. So that's one factor that's actually quite relevant. It's like, I mean, are the people that are role models within the organization actually enacting that behavior itself? And then within the theory of planned behavior, that's kind of like the other stigma variable. Yeah, and then again, the other one is like, how do you make it as easy as possible to implement? So for my own startup, we wanted to do repeated assessments of daily check-ins for mental health. And basically the data suggests like, don't try to do this for more than a week because people won't. So we've set our expectations appropriately low. And then, so because of that, like we're a little bit more biased for success that way. Whereas if we try to do it for 2 weeks, then it would be too irritating of a behavior for people to likely do it, if that makes sense. So it's all kind of, yeah, like setting your expectations accordingly. Yeah, and the smallest unit of behavior change that you can do is usually where you want to start and focus on.
Talking about the behavioral changes and the $15,000 value, so broad question, when you try to implement these, or rather when the businesses are trying to implement something and trying to change the behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
do you, in your analysis, do you have any sort of numbers coming from office spaces or urban design or architecture points? So what I'm trying to say is that we've seen the Google office, that's where you have a bunch of cool things happening in offices are very much interactive versus you go to the typical office. Anywhere else you have sort of fold floor ceiling, your booth and whatnot. Are there any
So I think I get the question you're asking, and the answer is no, that data does not exist. I would love it to exist, because I think that'd be super cool. But I can make a few speculations from a few other peer-reviewed studies and stuff like that. So one is like the amount of green space actually has a huge impact. There's one study where they had people view like a skyline where there's like trees visible just for like 40 seconds, and another one where they viewed like an urban city line without that. And they found that proofreading, so like attention to detail, improved after like 40-second micro breaks looking at green space. When I was down in Utah, we did some work on being in natural environments and how that can be beneficial for different cognitive processes. And that's another similar thing. So the more natural you can make the environment seem, the more social support you can kind of incorporate, that usually tends to make that cost go down. Because you're basically providing like buffers for stress. Yeah, but as far as like actual data that I can have to back up those statements, I don't have that, but would like to. There's a group in University of Calgary that's interested in architecture and kind of like the mental well-being component that can come along with that. So hopefully some data of that could come in the next few years from them.
A lot of research in Berkeley on that.
Okay. Yeah, well, there we go, yeah. So I'll have to check out them then. Thank you.
All right, well, please give a hand to Dr. McKinney.
Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I'll give you some great concrete examples and analogies to explain your points, which I really enjoyed, and I believe everyone else did as well. All right. So, thank you everyone for your insightful questions, and to Dr. McKinney once again, as well as Simba, Nyazika. We hope everyone is having a great time thus far. We have great news, so it's dinner time. Before we all rush to the table, however, I wanted to inform you that we have an array of sandwiches with a non-pork or halal option, salad, chips and dipping spread, which is guacamole, and a selection of beverages ranging from ginger ale to Coca-Cola to just bottled water if you want to be really healthy today. Should you have any questions or concerns regarding dietary restrictions or ingredients, please feel free to ask us. We also have an ingredients list on the table provided. As well, please stick around for our highly anticipated keynote speaker, Dr. Kinkade, who will be discussing the bridge between AI and psychology up next. This will be followed by networking, and finally we'll be conducting raffles for prizes. Thank you. Brief 10-minute intermission.
Please join us in about 10 minutes, and we will be back with our keynote speaker.
So we hope you enjoyed the brief intermission and meal. Up next, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Perry Kinkade. With expertise in change management and a background in the biochemistry of memory and neurophysiology of attention, Perry has dedicated his career to promoting innovative, emerging, and advanced technologies that are fundamental to the development of Alberta's economy. Over the years, Perry has co-founded several technology alliances that advance cell therapy, clean tech, and fusion technology. He has also developed an index for monitoring Alberta's economic resilience, which has been instrumental in identifying areas of opportunity for economic growth. Perry's public casting network, which features Alberta innovations, has helped to showcase the latest developments in emerging technologies to a broader audience. At the onset of COVID, Perry founded Kinkade Enterprises Incorporation, an international network of over 25,000 participants. Through Kinkade Enterprises, Inc., Perry continues to provide mentorship and financing for early-stage companies with industry-disruptive technologies. Moreover, he serves as a change agent to educate and establish networks capitalizing on the impact of emergency technologies. Please give a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Dr. Kinkade.
Can I impose upon you to move forward? I'm losing my hearing at my age. My audiogram says I can't hear more than 3 rows back. It doesn't really say that, but we'll pretend. So come on forward. It makes it a little bit more exciting for me to be able to see your eyes and know you're engaged and not sleeping. So if you could just sort of fill in these aisles here. So what I'm going to do while you're meandering, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my presentation in 2 parts. The first part, I'm going to tell you what has moved me, that has made me passionate to address a number of issues during the course of a career that has had various dimensions to it. I sometimes think I'm living a video game, and that every 12 years I hit a barrier and I have to make a change. And at that 12-year point, I usually get afraid. Anybody worried about what they're going to be when they grow up, or whether you're studying the right thing, or whether there'll be a job for you? I mean, when I was in graduate school, those things preoccupied me big time. And I do speeches or presentations on the role of fear in a career. And I can tell you how many times, whether it was coming out of high school, out of college, out of graduate school, out of the government, out of KPMG, wherever I was, there was a moment in time where a transition was underway. Maybe orchestrated by me, but often orchestrated as a byproduct of change going on in the world at large or in my organization. And that generated fear. But fear was the trigger for learning. And I was never afraid. I was afraid. I was afraid of the transition, but I was confident that I could make that transition. But it took hustle. It took a level of insecurity and humility that I want to learn. I wasn't going to tell you this, but I'll open early on. When I graduated from Colgate University, upstate New York, as a 19-year-old who spent most of his time thinking about my girlfriend who just dumped me and wondering what the hell am I going to do with my life, because when I was doing interviews, no business, they were looking out the window. They weren't even listening to what I had to say. I didn't know what the future was. And so I thought, well, I'll do the Peace Corps, because my girlfriend told me to grow up. Either go to Vietnam or grow up. I figured I'd rather grow up alive, so I'll do the Peace Corps thing. And then my dad, who had way too much influence on me, says to me, and by the way, this is relevant to my presentation. My dad says, my dad has organized for me to have a luncheon with an executive from IBM. And I know damn well my dad is not happy about me going to the Peace Corps. He thinks I bailed out. I mean, I paid a good buck to get me my degree at Colgate, and I was doing brain research even as an undergraduate with NFS grants. And he thinks I'm bailing out. And that consultant from IBM, I knew damn well, this guy's going to try to do it, twist my arm. Get me engaged in a career like my dad would want. And you know what the guy said to me? It totally caught me by surprise when it was dessert time and I knew the pitch was coming. And you know what he said? What do you want to do? What do you mean, what do I want to do? My girlfriend wants, my dad wants, my mother wants. What do you want to do? I said, I'll get emotional when I tell you this. I really am fascinated by the brain. I was absolutely enamored at the first course on hypnosis, what the brain could do. And with all the research that we were doing, we were creating alcoholics out of rats by pumping with little drops of alcohol into their cerebral ventricles. I couldn't believe what the brain was giving. He said, then follow your dream. So my girlfriend at the time shows me, she's going to University of Chicago in mathematics. She shows me how to apply to graduate school, which I do. Everywhere. I mean, it's August. You apply to graduate school in August, you better throw out a wide net. So I got accepted to Boston College, I got accepted to Hofstra, and then I accepted both, first Hofstra, then Boston College. And then I get this letter from, you may have never heard of this place, Alberta. I'd never heard of it. I mean, I'm living on Long Island, and I get this letter from University of Alberta. I open up, I've been accepted to University of Alberta, primarily because I knew how to do research, brain research with animals, stereotaxics, it's blah, blah, blah. I think, wow, this is cool. I don't have to go to Venezuela where they're going to take out my wisdom teeth before I go. I can go to Alberta, get on a train, and live in another country for a while, and you're 19, 20 years old, you want a little bit of an adventure. And so off I go. It's been amazing. I didn't leave. I didn't come to Canada because I wanted to come to Canada. I stayed in Canada because I love Canada, and I loved Alberta. And I found the pioneer spirit, the entrepreneurial initiative, the capacity to do what you want to do alive and well. Whereas in New York, it would have been, what's your dad do? Where did you go to college? I wanted to be free. And so I get into the department, I get my master's degree in biochemistry of memory. I'm moving polypeptides around between animals to demonstrate the biochemical nature of memory and showing that they could learn faster or slower. And then I get my PhD in the biochemistry of neurophysiology of attention, where we're with the rabbit showing how the evoked potential changes and develops as a byproduct of working through the thalamus and blah, 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 in order to show how the brain actually pays attention and what it pays attention to, how it does it, what the neurophysiological mechanism is. So now I have graduated, and when I open up the door, well, I got to tell you this little story. Before I graduate, the day of my candidacy, no, the night of before my candidacy, 3 nights before, I had 3 dreams in a row. I was a high anxiety person. I hardly passed any final exams where there was an exam. Oral exams, I was fine. But written exams, I was pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. I had these 3 dreams, which were a demonstration of my anxiety. One of them was, the first one, that I was invited to play a piano recital in Carnegie Hall. The trouble is, I don't play the piano. And that dream was hilarious. The second dream is a television broadcast of me boxing George Chuvalo, who's a Canadian boxing champion. I made it through 7 rounds before I got floored, but that was pretty good. And then the third dream is the candidacy exam itself. I'm standing outside a rosewood door, huge door, and inside is the examiners. I have my briefcase. I open up the door, and I move into the room, and I open up my briefcase, and I jump on the table with a machine gun, and I lay them all, I take them all out. That's my dream. That night, I'm at a cocktail party, and I tell the lawyer that I am a victim in that department. They have held me here for 7 years. I should have graduated a lot earlier, blah, blah, blah. He says, you could have left. You're telling me you're a victim. In reality, you made a decision to stay. Oh, was that humbling? I got to go into an exam tomorrow thinking that I'm a victim. I can lose and I can blame them. Now I'm responsible for my future. That was a turning point in my life. And that, I'll tell you how often in the course of my career, there was someone at the right time that gave me a hint. Choose your supervisors well in your career. Not only in your academic career, but as you move through your career, choose your supervisors well. They are magic. Find supervisors that are committed to learning, committed to letting you grow. I remember when J.P. Doss from the Department of Education said to me one single sentence when I graduated with my PhD, and he said, you've been studying the cells of the brains of rabbits and rats? Open up your eyes and look at the world. And at that time, I didn't have a future. I got my PhD, I opened up the door, and nobody was waiting for me. There was nobody saying, you got a PhD in neurophysiology of attention? God, we want you. Well, Yale wanted me, and UCLA wanted me, and the University of Southern Illinois. But I didn't want them because I wasn't an academic. I get a PhD, and I'm not an academic. I didn't write particularly well. I couldn't take exams particularly. I loved the lecturing, as you can imagine. I mean, I got an A in speech at college, and I got an A in statistics. That's defined my life, really, when I think about it. So on graduation, I had nothing. I had the option of these 3 postdocs, and then the worst of all scenarios happened. I got 3 job offers in a row. I cried that night because I knew I had to make a career decision. And how do I make a career decision? I mean, I got a PhD in brain research, which is the academic track. I got a job offer from University of Montreal to do lab research, or set up their lab. I had a job offer from the National Institute of Mental Retardation to become an agent for them in Western Canada. And I had a job offer from the Alberta government to become a regional director of services for people with disabilities. How did I make the decision? I knew I wanted to become a manager. I wanted to do something influential, but I didn't want to be working in the academic environment. I was probably too social. Now think about that. You know, are you a content expert, in which case you want to go out with that degree that gives you that specialty silver hammer that you can march around the world and talk about the hippocampus or whatever? Or are you potentially a manager who takes that research degree and says, the thing that I have learned is to do research. I can discover. If that's the case, you are an agent of the new economy, which is called the creative economy. As the knowledge economy begins to fade, thanks to ChatGPT and generative AI, we're beginning to see that knowledge is now becoming a commodity. And where the professions, you know the relationship between the profession and the client was one step above a slave in Roman times, because the professional had the knowledge and the client didn't. That defined that relationship. But what's happened to the client? They got an education, they got this. No, they might even have this, but they got this, and all of a sudden they go in to see the professional, and what are they doing? They're having a discussion. Well, I read about this, and I got this education, and the professional says, but I used to be able to tell you to take your medicine and go home. Now you want to have a relationship? I never learned anything about a relationship when I got my PhD in medicine or in dentistry or in engineering or in whatever. There's a book by the father and son Rabinovich called The Future of the Professions. It lays it all out. Another book on capitalism and data surveillance. It lays it all out. The ChatGPT, when it hit in November, brought me out of retirement. I retired last May for the 3rd time. And when ChatGPT hit and the breakthrough in fusion energy hit, both of them, I could not sit still. And so I reinstituted Kinkade Enterprises, started doing newsletters again. You go to KEInetwork.net, write that down, you can see the type of stuff I've been doing, both in the career and then in the last some odd months. And in that period, when ChatGPT hit, and generative AI said, knowledge is at everyone's fingertips. I wasn't selling encyclopedias anymore. I was giving you mobile, instant access to knowledge. I mean, the first 2 times I tried ChatGPT 3, I created an avatar, male, and an avatar, female, and I said to ChatGPT, give me a dialogue between these 2 characters, celebrating the fact that they have everlasting life and regretting the fact that they couldn't have children. Bam! There was the answer right there. There was the dialogue. Phenomenal. And then I did some webinars where we created avatars of a comedian, a teacher, I think it was a doctor, someone else. And the dialogue, each one of them gave a presentation on the relevance of humor in the face of wokeism, in the face of the challenges to free expression. You know, Francis Widdowson, who went down to speak to the University of Calgary, or University of Lethbridge, and then was halted and couldn't give her presentation, which made the point that free expression is at risk, on that campus anyway. So we did a webinar. We brought her in, we got the avatars to do the dialogue. It was phenomenal. We had 3 times the number of views and visitors. So one of my beliefs is we are seeing and witnessing, and I've been talking about it for many years now, the challenge to the knowledge economy as a byproduct of new technologies that are personalizing. Technologies know you better than you know yourself. You've heard that phrase before. But now as a professional, what the hell does that mean to me? I have unique knowledge. I'm a radiologist, but that damn machine does 90% better than I do. I better have good relational skills in order to retain my customers. So here's a tip. Here's a tip to success as an entrepreneur, because I am an entrepreneur. And by and large, I'm a change agent, but a change agent, whether it's inside or outside, is still an entrepreneur. I go into environments which are typically the unknown, the dark cave, and I love it. And I get into that space, and all of a sudden the chaos is there, and I have to make order out of it. God, sounds like a PhD, eh? And I have to make order out of this, and I create hypotheses in my mind, and before you know it, I'm doing this and that. But the one thing I'm always doing is I'm typically gathering data about the client, the person to be served. He who knows the customer best has no competition. Say that. He who knows the customer best has. That's what entrepreneurism is all about. Oh, we can talk money, marketing, management, moxie, mergers, manpower, all of the M's that make being an entrepreneur seem complex and something you got to go get a degree for. But the reality is, if you have a passion for customer, you're 90% there. I mean a passion. I don't mean thinking about the fact they've got money and you don't. That you love them. They are so important to you. You want to know where they buy, how they buy, what they want, when they want it. And I'll give you a couple of examples. And this was to be the main part of my speech. That was just an introduction, right? That was just foreplay. You want to get to the exciting part. Here's a story of a young man at 9 years of age and says to his father, "Dad, I'd like some Coca-Cola." And the father says to the son, "Tell your mother." And he said, "No, no, no." And it turns out what the boy was really looking for was stock, but he didn't know what stock was. Because he saw Coca-Cola was inventing some new breakfast drink in Japan. It was going to do really well, and he'd been watching television, talking to his granddad, and he knew this stock, which he thought you buy cans and put them in your garage. But so his dad bought him 1 share of Coca-Cola. That's not the end of the story. A week or two later, he comes to his granddad and he says, or he said to his dad, I guess, "I've been watching the stock market." "Oh my God, you've been looking at the paper?" "Yeah, I've been watching Coca-Cola. But Goodyear's doing really well too. I'd like to take that family allowance that you put aside for me and buy some good." Well, before you know it, he's ready to pay for his college tuition at 16. Part of it, I think, is because at age 9 he didn't have the hormones that I all had, and because I couldn't keep up with them. I had too many hormones to be a good investor. But he was magical. And he then gets his CFA in record time because he knew what he wanted to be. I mean, at grade 9, he knew he wanted to be into wealth management. Myers-Norris Penny spotted him. He went to Europe for a while to learn mergers and acquisitions. Through Myers-Norris Penny, comes back. He gets the opportunity to be an entrepreneur because a small business startup says, "Would you come help us grow?" Today, he's the president and the CEO of a wealth management company that's raised over $1 billion in the last 10 years. Entrepreneurial. I really cared about the client. I said to his grandfather at one time, "When my company does well, I want my clients to do well first before my staff do." The staff get rewarded as a byproduct of the good performance of that company. And I thought, the kid's got it right. Here's another one, I think even more dramatic. Here's a lost teenager selling tattoos down on White Avenue and hustling in the pool halls, not going to his classes. Now, part of the reason was his girlfriend dumped him in pre-med. I understand he then went to psychology for therapeutic reasons and ultimately ends up in education, which of course we all know is he bailed out, right? And he doesn't go to class. He's playing basketball and whatever, but he's still passing his exams because he's pretty smart. He goes and does his practicums and he says to his dad, "I don't want to be a member of a union. I've listened to how the teachers talk about the kids, and I'm really not interested. I love it. I like the kids. And I don't want to be going into a classroom thinking discipline all the time and yelling and going through all that nonsense. And I also don't want to work for a large organization because I think power corrupts and absolute power corrupts, and these institutions are all about supply management and self-preservation and status quo and have nothing to do with the imagination of teaching kids." His mother says, as I understand, "Oh, please make sure he gets his certificate." I understand the kid's a bit of a rebel. And then someone comes to his father and says, "Can you help me find a tutor?" What do you think the dad says? "I think I know where you got a tutor." So they form the relationship. He gets hired as a tutor. And a year later, the guy who initially brought him on came to me and said to me, "That kid's really good. We want to hire him as general manager. That's terrific. So the kid and I got talking, and we bought the agency instead. And I said to him at that time, do not bring your wife into the business. You find out what you're good at in that first year, and then you make a decision. Well, he loved the kids. Didn't make any money, because he gave things away. They missed their appointments, they didn't care. But after a year, I said, now you bring your wife in the business. And today, when he gives speeches about the success of his company, and it's been successful, the school boards give vouchers to the kids to go to that tutoring agency. He credits his wife for having made that into a business. So there's another lesson, that if you are an entrepreneur, appreciate that it's not the idea alone, and it's not the love of the consumer alone. You've got to have administrative support. And that may not be your forte, and more often it's not, but pick your partner carefully. So when I say money, marketing, management, I throw marriage in there because sometimes the best enterprise is one where the marriage really works. And you know, that's often a 24-hour-a-day, so they've got to take their breaks. So it's stressful. It's stressful. Here's the next one. This is about a woman. Could have been from Ukraine, but this particular woman was from the Czech Republic. At 19 years of age, she's walking across the street in Prague, and a nuclear physicist from Hungary is walking past, and he spots her, and they end up dating, and they end up getting married. And they escape from the Czech Republic. They go to the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen, and then from there, they go to the University of Brighton, and then from there to UCLA. There they separate, they divorce. She comes up to the psychology department to meet her parents who are here in Edmonton. And the psychology department says, when she says, I've got straight A's from UCLA, I'm looking for a graduate school, and they said, we don't welcome women in the department. That was 1971. We don't welcome them as staff. We have one on staff, but we don't welcome girls in the program. That was a reality in 1972. What did she do? She got angry, but she didn't get nasty. And she appealed to the chairman, and she got in. She got straight A's and got out in 3 years. Took me 7. Bitch, damn, God. I mean, she could pass exams with her eyes closed. And she didn't, and English wasn't her language. When she was at UCL getting straight A's, she's using a dictionary and still getting straight A's. I just didn't read particularly well. But those stories tell you a little bit about entrepreneurial initiative. When she got her PhD, she went to government, worked in a clinic, learned her trade, as I learned my trade, and as my sons learned their trade, because that's who these stories are about. Every one of them took a step before they became entrepreneurs to learn their trade in the context that was somewhat safe, where they had a salary, and then they broke out. When she broke out, she set up one of the first clinical practices. Simba might even know of her. Is Simba still here? No. Anyway, set up a clinical practice. There he is. You're so hard to identify, Simba. Anyway, did you know Alexandra? No, anyway. So she ran a clinical practice for 20 years, serving foster kids, native foster kids. A rough career, but got noticed and became the registrar for the College of Psychologists for 20 years. Entrepreneurial. Foreign, comes to a new country, decides that she wants to stand up on her own 2 feet and make her mark. Each one of those boys did the same thing. Entrepreneurs are just as exciting as entrepreneurs, but you got to pick your organization well. And my concern is most organizations want you to be an administrator, not a manager. And the difference being an administrator maintains the status quo. They maintain policy. You do things, that's the health system today. It's a monopoly. I don't care how many managers they say are managers, they do not have authority to make change. Their job is to maintain policy. Innovation in the health system is extremely difficult, as you know, not only because we want to make sure that everybody's safe, and I've run into that in lecturing around the province about the relevance of cell therapies, in Parkinson's example, and saying there are people in this room that are prepared to be subjects for research in this area, and the federal government said, no, we make sure everybody's safe. How do you bring about change if there isn't some elements of risk, and if the client isn't prepared, if the client is prepared to be the change agent? But to me, the excitement of life is change agentry. And you're getting a PhD, most of you are, or you've already gotten them, and you look at the world at large and you wonder if there's a place for you. Sure, there's a place for you. Do not be a victim. Keep your eyes wide open. Search. Find that place. Get a job that you like, and you'll never have to do a day's work in your life. You will get up every morning, as I have, thrilled about the excitement of what's going to happen in this day, either to you or as a byproduct of the things that you do. That's pretty well my wrap-up. The final messages were, he who understands the customer best has no competition, and to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Live with those values. Incorporate them into ChatGPT when they talk about ChatGPT and whether or not it has value or has a moral compass. Somebody will write into it, do unto others as you will have do unto you. It'll be frozen for a long while, but I suspect there will be different versions for different cultures. But we are in a world of dramatic change, and you're going to be some of the soldiers. You might be a specialist and find your little niche and work in a lab and do your lectures, and do your papers, and enjoy that limited life. Or you might open up your arms and want to embrace the world and have the excitement that I've enjoyed every day. And I was thrilled to hear that I had an opportunity to talk to you a little bit today about myself and my kids and my wife. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Perry Kinkade.
Okay. It's Perry would be fine.
Perry, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Actually, more storytelling and really insightful.
Well, you mentioned stories, and I was thinking in your presentation that there's a point in your life where you don't do PowerPoint anymore. And it means you're old enough to get away with telling stories. And I had to give a presentation to the graduates of the Commerce program at the U of A in Jasper one time. And I thought, for the first time in my life, I'm going to tell a story. I gave this presentation on the role of fear in a career, and I didn't do PowerPoint. And I really, okay, I'm old enough now to tell stories. But if you tell them too young, they don't believe, they have no credibility. You must have read it in a book or something. So anyway, you have any questions of me?
Before we get started, I just wanted to inform you that we'll be passing around the mic in the room just so we can hear clearly any questions that you may have for Perry today. So do we have any at the moment? Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Simba.
I'll just be over.
I don't have a teacher's voice. You are talking about the changes from the creative economy
to the creative economy.
To the creative economy. Can you talk a little bit more about how that might actually be changing the way we problem solve and the way we do things?
Well, it clearly is a willingness to look beyond the way things are being done today. It's not about embracing art and music, et cetera, and giving it elevated value. It's recognizing the relevance of the arts in all of what we do. It's recognizing the relevance of values in all of what we do. When you talk to Sam Altman, the guru on ChatGPT, he has a very strong appreciation for history, for arts, for English, because it's about humanism. It's about the humanities. And making sure that we, in the future, this more creative future that we speak of, where humanism prevails, not knowledge per se. So it's building in to all of what we've done a better appreciation of the relevance of the individual. That's the only way I can say it. It's turning this upside down. Knowledge has been king since the Middle Ages, the age of reason. But what we're going through now is this gradual transition. And I think it'll be completed when we see the end of monopolies and when we see that data surveillance and the ChatGPTs or generative AI woven into virtually everything that we do. That leaves the uniqueness of the human being in the process of creativity. And it doesn't mean another Picasso. It means in what we do, we understand that creative energy that goes into what it is that we're doing. That's the best I can do with that one.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Come on. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is going to be relatively left field, but in the introduction you spoke about economic measures of resilience for Alberta.
Yeah.
Could you just like say more on that general
Sure.
topic, because I think that's fascinating and
Wh- wh-
relevant for us in
One of the things
innovation.
that has always concerned me is political bullshit. During an election, you'll get all sorts of promises, and then the world goes on as if that promise didn't even exist. And one of them that's been around for a long while is economic diversification. And knowing full well that Alberta, that I love, and is one of the more prosperous places on earth for that reason, has what it has is because of a heavy reliance on the oil and gas industry. But that reliance makes us vulnerable to the volatility of global prices. And so it seemed to me very relevant and politically valuable to talk about diversification, but then how to go about doing it, because there are virtually no other places on earth that have been able to diversify off the oil and gas economy. The best that I can point to is Texas, where they've made some transitions into technology, aerospace, et cetera, but very few others. Now, you know Saudi Arabia and Dubai and the Arab Emirates are trying very hard to get into tourism and a lot of other economies in order to get off their heavy reliance on oil and gas. But it is extremely difficult. So what I wanted to do is put a standard, a monitor out there that we could monitor economic resilience of Alberta and see whether we were making progress or not. Not to embarrass anyone, but to simply have that weather report. And so every 6 months, I designed a survey that asked, what? Is the economy resilient? Is your economy resilient? That was the leading question. And then we would monitor it every 6 months, and we have been doing it for almost 7 years now. We had some associated questions. Second one was, what industry are you interested in? Name the top 5. So then we could do some crosstabs between what industry they were in or had interest in and how they rated the overall economy. And then we could look at the views of economic resilience by industry. We also did the same by location. Northern, central, southern, Edmonton, and Calgary. So we could do regional assessments as well as industry assessments. We asked the question of the role of government. And we asked the question later on, I think second or third year, we asked the question on the effectiveness of the innovation ecosystem. You speak of ecosystem, the availability of money management, or the system that supports entrepreneurial initiative and innovation. And then we gave them 4 or 5 processes like leadership, resource management, et cetera, infrastructure, to rate those in terms of how they were contributing to. So we got some pretty good raw data. What did it show? Well, initially it showed Calgary really swinging, and Alberta, or Edmonton, buffeted or buffered by the fact we had public service expenditures. We had a public service sector heavily reliant on government, and while the oil and gas industry was going down and revenues in government would fluctuate, government had some resources in order to level out the economy in Edmonton. But what is seen is innovation in Calgary is alive and well. Innovation in Edmonton is stymied by the fact that it has such a strong public sector orientation, meaning education, health, and government are heavily reliant on the monopoly of government. And when anybody cuts their budget, they send somebody to protest off at the government instead of going to the consumer to generate health and future and diversity by appealing to their markets. Their markets are government. When I was involved in selling Edmonton telephones to TELUS, and then later as a strategic advisor to TELUS, I often went into these undertakings rather naive. And when I went into TELUS after the Edmonton sale, my point with them was the importance of recognizing, with privatization alive and well, understanding your customer. Hey, what are you where are you from anyway? We don't make money by selling to customers. We make money by spending time with a regulator. If we can get a regulation that gives us exclusive domain, we make more money on that than we do selling to we don't have a lot of respect for customers. Of course, they were all wedded to the copper switch too. And the reason why is we don't have a lot of competition in our environment, and that impedes innovation. So anytime you have a monopoly like you do in healthcare and education, you're not going to get a lot of innovation, because why would you? And in fact, what you're typically responding to is the demands of suppliers, not of consumers, because you have a monopoly. So every time there's a waiting list, what is a waiting list going to trigger? We need more doctors. Well, why don't you deal with a waiting list? Find out why this waiting. Well, maybe the waiting list could be served with people that are called nurses, or maybe they could be served in the local community. We don't do that. And with a monopoly, waiting lists are a brilliant way for suppliers to get more. When I was involved with services for people with disabilities, the first question that was asked when they formed the new division was, what are we going to do with all the people on the waiting list for the institution in Red Deer that already had 3,000 people in it? And we had a waiting list with over 400. And what would we do? Every year we build another wing because we had a waiting list of 400. We needed to clear that. So somebody had the bright idea of asking everybody on the waiting list, do you want the bed today, tomorrow, or yesterday? And what do you think they said? Tomorrow. Well, why on the waiting list today? Because we were told there was a shortage. A shortage. Oh my God, if there's a shortage, we got to have more beds. We didn't need more beds. So what we did, we created community service alternatives. We created competition. The parents bought it overnight. The parents didn't want to institutionalize their kids, but it was the only option they had. And they were trying to answer the question, what happens to my kid when I'm gone? I got to settle that now, particularly when there's a shortage of beds. If there's a bed, I'll take it. You would be astounded at how resilient some families were in raising some of the children that I'm aware of you probably would never appreciate. Parents have a love for their kids. They didn't like institutionalizing, but it was the only option they had. But when we created competition, the whole system changed. All of a sudden, the schools had to open up. The doctors had to do more than read page 45 of the pediatrics manual that said, oh, 3rd grade max, likely institutional. I mean, the world changed. My fear was, since we bought our way in there, the money that we used to develop community services came from the institution. We tied the money to the person. So every time we brought someone back, and they always had the option of returning, the parent could always send their kid back if our promises weren't fulfilled. And that was an important promise. The money was tied to them, so the money came to us, giving us the financing to build community service alternatives. We didn't need more. We didn't need new money. In one instance, where we built an apartment complex, where we were training people on apartment living, coming back to the community. None of the homeless in Edmonton are not a byproduct of this. That's a mental health issue. Mental retardation, developmental is not a mental health issue. It's a developmental issue. It's an educational issue. It's a learning issue. Something psychologists would embrace. But the changes that we made were a byproduct of changing the paradigm from a medical system to one that was a developmental system. Same with many of the issues that you face with an aging population. We thought that what we were doing was anticipating what we would be doing for seniors. By developing community service alternatives, we didn't need to think institutional care. We developed volunteer infrastructure. We developed new manpower called rehabilitation practitioners. We did everything to build an ecosystem to enable the community to be sustainable as an environment for that population, and it worked. But somehow or another, we forgot it for seniors, which are still living in lodges, and we saw the consequences of that during COVID with these large nursing homes, which are probably doing their job in terms of providing a bed, but I'm not sure what the quality of life might be. So anyway, that's a passionate answer to a short question and a long answer. Anyway, there was that experience was unbelievable, where by talking to parents, I have to tell you a joke though. By talking to parents, we learned so much. By having a philosophy of living as normal a life in as normal a setting as possible, we had a philosophy. By hiring young kids and young people to be our change agents, all of that worked well. Well, one day, and you can imagine, I was in good management principle. I walked the talk. I was in the community. I was a speaker. I was an advocate. I was a zealot. But I was not abusive. I never said to a community, you take a group home because we got power or not. You don't want the group home doesn't go here. They were stunned because we had all of the government power in the world. We didn't do that. We didn't exercise power. We exercised what a parent would do for their own child. They would never put a home in a community that was rejecting. So we found, and I learned this by flying over Edmonton one day, and this is a big city. We got to find places. We had 55 group homes before you knew it. They're probably invisible. So one day, I'm to do a presentation or meet with the parents with kids with multiple disabilities. I was relatively comfortable with the group because I knew the group fairly well, and I knew what the subject would be. And so I arrived early in St. Joachim's church in the basement, or just near off Jasper Avenue. And I'm sitting there, and the man next to me is feeling very guilty, and he tells me this story before I even asked about his abusing his kids and how he felt really uncomfortable. And I'm thinking, we're trying so hard with our case management unit to support parents during the period when they don't have the services, and the other unit being a resource development unit to bail them out and get those resources in place as fast as possible. And then I realized I'd walked into an AA meeting by mistake. It was Alcoholics Anonymous. The guy was, anyway, I thought it was funny, but wrong meeting. Anyway, so many interesting moments in the course of the career. Any other questions, comments, observations, funny stories? You all want to get, you guys are smiling. You're obviously relating to what I had to say. What did I have to say that you'll always remember?
Honestly, a lot of it.
Yeah?
To specify the customer part was pretty
Right.
Because as an engineer, your customer is stupid, so.
Yeah. Anyway, how about you? You were smiling throughout. Anything you remember in particular?
I mean, I can think so many things. I understood so many things, and the stories which you shared are like so connecting. I connected with all of those. I mean, most of those.
Well, you'll find in the course of your own career that there may be moments where you'll remember back that was said, and it'll help you make the decision at the right point, at the right juncture. But keep in mind that point about choose your supervisor wisely. You're not a slave. While you may be passionate about getting the right job, appreciate you're going to be in that job like a marriage. And if you're interested in setting up a partnership for a business, choose really carefully, because that's more complex than marriage. When you get into a business relationship, often you don't know, even yourself, how you're going to handle conflict. That when you run out of money and you got to meet payroll, and it would be so easy to lie or tell a little story or stretch the bank account somehow, your ethics will be tested. Your ethics will be tested. And that's why I think small business is an unbelievable asset because people that have survived small business have been tested. And they may have even been bankrupt. When I faced a bankruptcy, well, I've only faced bankruptcy once, but I got a lot of stories to tell of failure. And every one of those was a test. And when I had those failures, that added to my credibility of being a consultant to small businesses, because when they know that when they know that you have been at that point, they know you've reached your own ethical limits, and they're phenomenal. To know a successful entrepreneur is to know a real personality, because it takes one hell of a journey, and we don't give enough credit in our society. We honor the PhD, we honor the deputy ministers, we honor the big shots. But that little guy who 24/7 is worrying and working to make sure that his business will thrive, I tell you, it's worth building the foundation for a nation on. And I'm hoping in the coming years that we think less about asking government for another grant and thinking about how can we find the customer that will keep us alive. But it's way too easy in this country for that to be the handshake. That's how U of A comes out. I mean, the first overture you'll get from the U of A is this. That's not fair. You should be viewed as one of their best assets. And that you go out into the world appreciating that you got to start up here. And if they appreciate that, they'll come to you and say, tell us your story. That's the most important thing of all. Tell us your story. Then I might get around to asking for a handout. But too often, it's got to be the buck. And I think that betrays what the ultimate motive is. And when the institution understands its customers, it's not asking for money first. It's asking a little bit about you and your relationship. I know I do reunions. I do a reunion for my high school back on Long Island every 5 years, and did a reunion here for all the graduates of the psychology department at the graduate department level. We brought 100 in. 100 students from literally all over the world, a whole range of successes. A lot of management consultants, a lot of academics. You know who didn't show up at the reunion? The profs. We were stunned. We wanted to talk about our relationships. You don't talk about your relationships your first year out. Your first year out, you talk about your new job. And then you talk about your publications. And then you talk about your association. And finally, about 30 years out, you begin to talk about the memories that you had of those years when you were a graduate student. And that's what that reunion was all about. And what we wanted was to talk to the profs about the relationships that the times we'd spent in the bar, maybe having a beer or skiing in the mountains. They didn't, that wasn't part of that wasn't particularly relevant. That was a bit of a story. I told that to the university. I said, we learned real lessons in that study about how do you sell alumni 10 years out, 20 years out, 30 years out, 40 years. This is what you need to know. Hopefully they paid attention. Anyway, I'll keep this up and I'll get kicked out of here. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Please give a hand to Perry.
Well, you did it. You invited. Good handshake. She's going to make it far. You know those limp handshakes that you get? You know the limp handshake? You don't want to. Show me your handshake. Give me a handshake. You got it. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Perry. Yeah. All right. So before we start wrapping up, thank you for your insightful questions. We're just going to get back to our slides here in just a moment. Thank you. So yes, we'll just do a raffle draw, but I thought we might do something a little exciting this time involving our speakers. I want our speakers today to come up with a question for everyone, and based on the answer to that question, of your choice, of course, they can win a $20 Starbucks gift card. So, do we have any takers? Simba, Ty, or Perry?
What was the company that 9-year-old boy wanted to buy stock in? What was it? Yeah, Coca-Cola.
Excellent. You get a gift card. Thank you for your participation, Mohammed. You'll get brownie points from me. All right. Who's up next?
What's the average ROI of mental health initiatives? Average ROI? 4x. Yeah, there we go.
Who got it?
Return on investment? How much was it? What was the answer?
4x. Was it a tie? Just like tie? All right, let's do a one-on-one. Ready? We're going to give a follow-up question.
Okay.
It's getting grilled here.
What percentage of people are going to have a mental health issue? There you go.
Congrats. You're welcome. And last but not least, Simba Nyazika. What is your question for everyone?
You took my question. What impact do you want to have on the world?
Ooh, this is more of a thought-provoking question.
What was the question?
What impact would you like to have on the world? Is that correct?
Yes.
So this is more food for thought. Sorry?
Change the mental thinking of the person. Change the perspective of the person.
I think Simba really wants to pick at your brain today.
No right answer. I'm just waiting for someone to answer it. Probably say solve the healthcare problem that Dr. Perry talked about the waiting times and stuff. So I think having an impact in the healthcare would really go forward, and I think integrating probably AI in the coming future would definitely have a great impact. And I think I would like to be part of it.
Okay, congrats. Here you go. All right, so I'm just going to pop a few slides here. So we've now entered our networking period. I know that we're a little over time today, to say the least. But if you want to stick around, please feel free to do so. I just wanted to let you know, Once again, to Holly Berlin, thank you so much for the sponsor address. That was wonderful today. Once again, she's from the Alzheimer's Society of Alberta and Northwest Territories, so please feel free to stick around and speak with her if you have any questions. As well, the Glenrose Rehabilitation Research, Innovation, and Technology, and the Hunter Hub for Entrepreneurial Thinking, and last but not least, Amy. We also have other ongoing events, including our workshop series. I know that we had a few questions in the audience, specifically referring to learning Python or other programming languages. I'd like to let you know that Cameron right over here, he actually delivers those programs. Would you like to give a word on any of the workshops?
Sure. So yeah, we're going to be offering a handful of workshops coming up this fall. I'm not 100% sure when registration actually opens, but keep an eye on the website and the newsletter, and you'll be the first to hear.
Thank you, Cameron. He teaches the Python/programming, so please feel free to get in touch with him. We also have our largest annual event of the year, which is NatHacks. Some of you may already be familiar or have participated. I met a few in the room today, so thank you once again for attending and participating today. We really appreciate your engagement. We also have upcoming natChats, which are basically the speaker-style series events. In the past, we also had artificial intelligence. This time, we had more of a business orientation. And please feel free to stick around for other natChats that you can hear announced in the near future. As well, we have project teams at the U of A, as well as in collaboration with other institutions. So you can always check out our webpage at neuralberta.tech for that. And I just want to give a big thank you to everyone. If you'd like to provide any feedback, we'd greatly appreciate it. So please take a moment. You can scan that QR code just up there, and that can just let us know how we can improve for future events. Thank you. And to stay up to date, please follow us on media if you're curious. And that's about everything for today. So please feel free to stick around. You can eat any of the remaining food and network. Thank you, everyone. Please give a round of applause to our guest speakers and sponsor address. Thank you.